I know it was you.
Director Kang, his condition is critical.
The feared Korean mafia boss opened the wrong hospital room by mistake. He expected a stranger. Instead, he came face to face with the woman who vanished 4 years ago, and the newborn baby whose face looked exactly like his. In that moment, he realized someone had hidden the biggest secret of his life, and someone else was already coming to take it from him. Existed. That's not love, that's cowardice wearing a tuxedo. If you believe a real man owns up to his mistakes instead of running from them, hit subscribe and drop a like. Only the cowards and the runners in the comments will scroll past this one. Seoul didn't sleep. It just changed which lies it told at night, and tonight it was lying to Kang Junho. He'd built his entire empire on the belief that he could see 3 moves ahead of anyone. Rivals, cops, even God, if God ever decided to get involved in his business. Men called him the Quiet Storm. Not because he was calm, because by the time you heard him coming, you were already drowning and too proud to admit it. Tonight should have been simple. A bullet had found his lieutenant instead of him, and Seoul Grace Private Hospital, the kind of place where money bought silence and silence bought survival, had been locked down floor by floor, cameras scrubbed, guards posted. Junho didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in control, and for 34 years, control had never once failed him. Until a wrong turn down a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and bad decisions led him through a door that wasn't his to open. The room was dim, quiet, except for the small, furious cry of a newborn. And there she was, sitting up in the hospital bed like the last 4 years had simply forgotten to happen. Ama Mensa, the woman who'd once made him believe a man like him could still be soft somewhere, the way a knife can still have a dull edge if you're foolish enough to hold it wrong on purpose. He hadn't seen her since the night he disappeared from her life on purpose, convinced that loving her from a distance was the only mercy a man in his position could offer. Enemies who couldn't find his heart had a habit of finding the people attached to it. So he'd cut the thread himself, cleanly, the way he did everything. He just hadn't known there was a second thread already growing beneath it. His eyes moved to the bundle in her arms. The baby had his jaw. That stubborn, unteachable jaw his own father used to joke belonged on a man twice his size. Small fists. A sharp little nose that hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet, except that it already looked unmistakably, infuriatingly like him. It felt like staring into a mirror that had learned how to breathe. "Who?" Junho said, and his voice came out smaller than anything he'd allowed himself to sound in a decade. "Is this child?" Ama's fingers tightened around the blanket like she could will the moment backward. Her voice was steel wrapped in exhaustion, thin enough to see through. "You weren't supposed to find us." 6 words. They landed harder than the bullet currently lodged in his lieutenant's shoulder, 2 floors above them, and that bullet had nearly killed a man. He stepped closer anyway, because apparently grief made him stupid in ways violence never had. The baby's hand found his thumb and wrapped around it with a grip that had no business being that strong, that certain. Like the boy already understood the family business. You hold on, or you get left behind. For a man whose enemies swore he didn't have tear ducts, that was the part that nearly broke him. "I never wanted him to grow up surrounded by blood and fear," Ama whispered, watching him carefully, like she was deciding in real time whether he was still the man she remembered or just wearing his face. "I wanted him to have a chance." Junho opened his mouth to answer her, and that was the exact moment the lights in the hallway outside flickered, once, then steadied. 3 floors down, in a parking structure that didn't ask questions of cash, a black sedan sat with its headlights off and 2 men inside who didn't believe in coincidences either. They believed in opportunities wearing coincidence as a disguise. They'd been watching this hospital for 3 weeks. They knew exactly which room they were here for, and neither Junho nor Ama had any idea the countdown had already started. The cry that tore through room 412 wasn't the baby's this time. It was the monitor by Ama's bed, beeping in a rhythm that meant nothing good, and for 3 full seconds Junho forgot he was supposed to be the most dangerous man in Seoul. He was just a man whose hands didn't know what to do. "He's fine," the nurse said quickly, sliding between them to check the baby's vitals. "It's her blood pressure. She needs to rest." Ama waved her off with the particular stubbornness of a woman who'd given birth 12 hours ago and still hadn't been allowed to feel safe for a single one of them. "I've rested enough. I need answers." So did Junho. He turned to the nurse, a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Soo-jin, and asked the only question that mattered. "Who else has been in this room tonight?" Something flickered across her face. "Quick." Practiced, gone before most men would have caught it. He wasn't most men. Just hospital staff, she said. Try again. Sujin's composure cracked at the edges, the way cheap plaster does when you lean on it too hard. There was a woman. Earlier. She said she was a relative, checking on the transfer paperwork. I didn't think. You weren't paid to think, Junho said, and the words came out quieter than a shout but landed twice as hard. You were paid to forget you saw anything, so who paid you more to remember? The nurse didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was answer enough, and Junho had spent 15 years learning how to read silence like other men read newspapers. Outside, his men had finally caught up to him. 2 bodyguards filling the doorway, confusion stamped across faces that had never once seen their boss stand still this long in a crisis. Sir, the East Wing is locked. Lieutenant Park is stable, but lock the West Wing too, Junho said. Nobody in or out without my signature. Nobody. Amma watched all of this with the particular horror of a woman realizing the fairy tale she'd told herself for 4 years. He's gone, he's out of our lives, we're safe because we're invisible, had just been demolished in under 10 minutes. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she said. The moment you knew about him, the moment anyone connected to your world knew about him, he stopped being a baby and started being a target. He was already a target, Junho said grimly. I just didn't know it yet. Neither did you. That stopped her. What are you talking about? He didn't answer right away because he was still doing the math himself, counting backward through every strange phone call he'd dismissed this month, every supplier who'd suddenly gone quiet, every small inconsistency he'd filed under paranoia instead of pattern. The Yoon family had been too quiet for too long. Quiet in his world was never peace. It was reloading. There's a woman downstairs who flagged this room, he said slowly. Paid in cash. That's not random. That's reconnaissance. Someone has been watching you, Amma, maybe for weeks. Her hand went instinctively to the baby, pulling him closer, as if proximity could be its own kind of armor. Watching me for what? For exactly this moment, Junho said. For the moment I'd finally know he exists. A son nobody can prove isn't valuable until somebody decides to prove it. To my enemies, he's not a baby. He's leverage with a heartbeat. The words tasted like poison coming out of his mouth, mostly because he knew they were true, and partly because 4 years ago he'd promised himself he'd burned every bridge connecting her to this life. Apparently, bridges had a way of rebuilding themselves out of nothing more than blood and bad timing. Down in the parking structure, the black sedan's headlights finally clicked on, not aggressively, patiently. The kind of patient that came from men who already knew which elevator led to which floor and which floor led to which room, and who weren't in any hurry at all because they believed, correctly, that Junho's lockdown would only buy minutes, not safety. Junho looked at the nurse one last time. Who's coming, Sujin? And how long do we have? Her voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. They said sunrise. They said it would look like an accident. Sunrise. The word sat in the room like a third presence, patient and indifferent, the way bad news always is, right before it becomes worse news. Junho checked his watch. 2 hours and 11 minutes until the sky outside Seoul Grace turned the color of an excuse. The soft gray that hospital administrators loved, because soft gray made it easier to wheel a patient out for transfer without anyone asking why the transfer paperwork had been signed by a name that didn't exist. Sujin, he said, careful now. The way a man speaks to a witness he still needs alive and talking. Who told you it would look like an accident? The nurse's hands trembled around the chart she was still pretending to read. A woman, older. Expensive coat, the kind that doesn't come from a salary like mine. She didn't give a name. She gave a number, and half of it up front. Description. Sharp eyes, a scar near her left eyebrow, thin, like a paper cut that never healed right. Junho's jaw tightened. He knew that scar. Everyone in his world knew that scar. It belonged to a woman named Director Yoon Hae-rin, the coldest negotiator the Yoon family had ever produced. A woman who'd once closed a $6 million arms deal, while her own brother bled out in the next room because, in her words, grief is for people who can afford to stop working. If Hae-rin was personally involved, this wasn't reconnaissance anymore. This was a closing move. They're not just watching, Junho said, mostly to himself. They're already inside the building. Amma's voice cut through his calculations, sharp with 4 years of practiced independence colliding head-on with a fear she clearly hated needing his help to face. Then we leave. Now, forget paperwork, Forget discharge forms. I am not waiting 2 hours to find out if accident means a fire alarm or something a lot more permanent. Moving you now is exactly what they want, Junho said. An unguarded hallway, a service elevator, a parking structure with one exit. You'd be safer in a war zone than out there alone. I haven't been alone in years, she snapped. I've been careful. I built an entire life on careful. And careful just walked into the wrong waiting room, he said, quieter now, the same as I did. It wasn't an accusation. It landed like one anyway, and for a moment the air between them was thick with everything unsaid for 4 years. The apology he'd never gotten to give, the explanation she'd never gotten to demand, the son who'd grown inside her without either of them choosing the timing. The baby stirred, fussing softly, and Amma's whole body curved around him instinctively, the way a mother's does when the world outside stops being theoretical. A soft knock interrupted them. One of Junho's bodyguards stepped halfway into the room, his face arranged into the careful neutrality men learn when they're about to deliver news their boss won't enjoy. Sir, Lieutenant Park is conscious. Good, bring him here. Sir, he's requesting to speak to you alone, says it's about the leak. Something in Junho went very, very still. He'd spent 15 years cultivating an instinct for exactly this kind of stillness, the kind that came right before a building came down, when every beam was still standing, but you could feel the weight shift somewhere underneath the floor. Watch the door, he told the bodyguard. Nobody enters or leaves this room except me. Amma caught his sleeve as he turned to go, her grip surprising in its strength. If something happens to me in here while you're gone, nothing will happen to you in here, he said. I trust the men outside that door. You trusted the lieutenant too, she said. Look how that's going. He didn't have an answer for that, partly because she was right, and partly because some small, traitorous part of him had already begun to suspect that loyalty, in his world, had become a currency so devalued that nobody bothered counterfeiting it anymore. They just sold the real thing quietly, to whoever paid first. He left her with 2 guards and a sleeping baby and walked the corridor toward the east wing, toward a lieutenant he'd trusted enough to bleed resources protecting tonight. A lieutenant who, it was about to turn out, hadn't been protected from anything. He'd been the door. Lieutenant Park Sung-min looked smaller in a hospital bed than he ever had standing in a room full of armed men, which Junho supposed was the point of hospital beds. They had a way of stripping a man down to whatever he actually was underneath the title. You wanted to see me, Junho said, closing the door behind him. Alone. Park's hand drifted toward the IV line in his arm, fidgeting with it the way men fidget with things when they're trying not to look at the person they're about to disappoint. Boss, before anyone else tells you a version of this, I need you to hear it from me. I'm listening. They came to me 3 weeks ago, the Yoons. They knew things about my sister's medical bills they shouldn't have known, things that meant if I said no, she'd lose her treatment. If I said yes, all I had to do was confirm a room number when they asked. And tonight, Junho said evenly, they asked. Tonight they asked. Park's voice cracked, not from pain in his shoulder, but from somewhere closer to shame. I didn't know about the woman. I swear on my sister's life, I didn't know there was a child. I thought I was confirming your room. I thought I was the bait, not... He stopped. Not the man who handed them my son, Junho finished for him. The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind that pressed down on a room and made the air taste like metal. Here was the thing about Junho that even his own men sometimes forgot. He hadn't built an empire by being the loudest man in the room with the most guns. He'd built it by being the only man in the room who never let feeling betrayed stop him from thinking clearly. Rage was for men who could afford to lose. He couldn't. Not tonight. You're going to do something for me, Junho said, and it's going to be the only thing standing between your sister keeping her treatment and you keeping your kneecaps. Park nodded, fast, desperate. Anything. Text them back. Tell them the room transferred early. Administrative error, panicked staff, whatever excuse a hospital this expensive uses to cover its own incompetence. Tell them the new room is 418. There is no room 418. There will be, Junho said. By the time they get there. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't supposed to be. Subtlety was a luxury for men who had time. What Junho had instead was a hospital floor he controlled, 2 hours until sunrise, and an enemy who believed they still had the element of surprise, which made them, in his experience, the easiest kind of enemy to beat. Confidence made men sloppy. He intended to use that sloppiness like a scalpel. He stepped out of the room only to find Su Jin waiting in the hallway. pale, twisting her hands together in the particular way of someone who'd decided guilt was worse than danger. "There's something else," she said. The woman with the scar, she wasn't just asking about the room, she was asking about discharge timing, specifically whether the mother would be moved by ambulance or by private car. Junho's blood went cold in a way bullets had never managed. An ambulance meant predictable routes, predictable drivers, predictable men with badges who could be paid, threatened, or simply replaced for one night only. If Hayrin was asking about transport method, she wasn't planning to strike inside the hospital at all. She was planning to let them leave first. A car accident, 2 hours from now, on a road no one would think twice about. That was clean. That was deniable. That was exactly the kind of quiet, bloodless violence the Yoon family had perfected long before Junho was old enough to understand what his own father did for a living. He thought of Amma in that room, stubborn and exhausted and furious at a world that kept making decisions for her, and of the baby's fist wrapped around his thumb like the boy already understood the family rule: hold on or get left behind. "Cancel every discharge order on this floor," Junho said. "Nobody leaves Seoul Grace tonight. Not by ambulance, not by car, not by anything with wheels." "Sir, that's not standard protocol." "Neither," Junho said, already walking, "is what happens if you let them try." Room 418 sat at the end of the east wing, dark, unoccupied, and exactly the kind of trap that worked because it didn't look like one. Junho had 3 men positioned inside before Park's text even finished sending, 2 flanking the door's blind spot, 1 beneath the window with a view of the service stairwell nobody but desperate people ever used. He didn't go back to Amma right away. He needed to see this play out with his own eyes, needed to know the threat had a face before he let himself believe it was contained. He didn't have to wait long. At 4:42 a.m., the stairwell door opened with the careful, unhurried confidence of someone who'd never once in her career needed to run from anything. Director Yoon Hae-rin stepped into the hallway in a coat that cost more than most men's annual salaries, flanked by a single man whose hand never strayed far from his jacket. She didn't look surprised to find room 418 empty. She didn't look surprised when the lights came up and 3 of Junho's men stepped out of the dark either. If anything, she looked faintly amused, the way a woman looks when a game she's already won takes one extra round to finish. "Junho," she said his name like she was tasting it. "I expected you'd be cleverer than a fake room number. I'm almost disappointed." "I expected you'd be smart enough not to come yourself," he said, stepping out from the doorway behind his men. "I'm almost disappointed, too. Sentiment makes people careless." Hae-rin's eyes flicked past him, scanning, calculating. "You, of all people, should know that. You vanished on a pregnant woman because you thought love was a liability. And here you are, 4 years later, burning down hallways to protect the very liability you ran from. Tell me, was the running pointless, or is the protecting?" "Both can be true," Junho said. "I was wrong then. I'm not wrong now." How touching. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't so much as glance at the armed men around her, which told Junho everything he needed to know. This wasn't her endgame, just a piece of it she was willing to sacrifice. "You should ask yourself why my family went to this much trouble for 1 woman and 1 infant, Junho. We don't chase liabilities, we chase value. And a child with your blood and no official claim to your name is worth more to us alive, raised in our house, taught our rules, than he is to you, as a secret you almost let slip through your fingers." The words landed exactly where she meant them to. Not as a threat, but as a mirror, forcing him to see the version of himself that had nearly let this happen through cowardice dressed up as protection. "He's not a chess piece," Junho said. "Everyone's a chess piece," Hae-rin said. "The only question is who's holding the board." She finally smiled, thin and unbothered, and took 1 slow step backward toward the stairwell. "You won tonight. A fake room, a clever trap. Congratulations. But you should be asking yourself how I knew about a baby that wasn't supposed to exist in the first place. Someone closer than a hospital nurse has been talking, Junho. And it isn't your lieutenant. He only confirmed a room number. Someone gave us the timeline, the due date, the hospital, months ago." Junho's stomach dropped through the floor. "Who?" he demanded, but Hae-rin was already retreating, unhurried, untouchable in the way that powerful people always seemed untouchable right up until the moment they weren't. "Ask the people closest to her," she said over her shoulder. "The ones she trusted enough to tell where she was really going 4 years ago when she disappeared from your life so completely." The stairwell door swung shut behind her, and Junho's men moved to follow, but he raised a hand to stop them. Chasing Heyrin into a stairwell she'd chosen herself was exactly the kind of mistake that got men killed in his line of work. He stood there instead, turning her words over like a blade he didn't remember picking up. Someone closer than a hospital nurse, someone she trusted. He thought of every name Amma might have confided in 4 years ago. Family, friends, the handful of people who'd helped her vanish from Seoul without a trace. And one name surfaced before he could stop it, cold and unwelcome. A name that had no business belonging on a list of suspects. Her own sister. Amma's sister. Abina. The name sat in his chest like a stone he'd swallowed whole, because if Heyrin was telling the truth, and powerful people rarely bothered lying when the truth did more damage, then the betrayal hadn't started in a hospital corridor tonight. It had started years ago, somewhere Junho had never thought to look, because he'd never imagined danger needing an invitation from inside the family Amma trusted most. He walked back to room 412 with his jaw set and his thoughts louder than the hallway around him, and the moment he stepped inside, Amma read his face before he said a single word. "What happened?" she said. It wasn't a question. 4 years of raising a secret alone had taught her to recognize bad news on sight, the way other people recognized weather. Heyrin was here. We intercepted her in a room that wasn't yours. He paused, hating what came next almost as much as he hated needing to ask it. She said someone close to you gave them the timeline, the due date, this hospital, months ago. Amma went very still, the particular stillness of a person doing the same arithmetic he'd already done, arriving at the same uncomfortable sum. That's not possible. The only person who knew where I was, who knew when I was due. She stopped. Abina, Junho said quietly. No. The word came out fast, reflexive, the way people defend the people they love before they've finished deciding whether the defense is true. My sister has hated everything about your world since the day I told her who you were. She begged me to leave Seoul. She's the reason I had somewhere safe to go. Or she's the reason they always knew exactly where to find you, Junho said, gently as he could manage, which wasn't gently at all because there was no soft way to hand someone a betrayal with her own family's fingerprints on it. Amma's hands curled into the blanket around the baby, knuckles pale. She couldn't. But even as she said it, something flickered across her face, a memory surfacing against her will. 6 months ago, she needed money. A lot of it, fast, for a business that fell through. I didn't ask where it went after I sent it. I just assumed. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The pieces slid into place with the particular ugliness of puzzles that only make sense once you already wish they didn't. A sister drowning in debt, a family with deep pockets and an old grudge against Junho, and a younger sister's location worth exactly as much as the price of silence. I need to call her, Amma said, already reaching for her phone with hands that weren't quite steady. Not yet. Junho's voice carried the weight of a decision already made. If she's been talking to them, a phone call tells her we know. Right now, that's the only advantage we still have. Amma looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd walked through the wrong door 8 hours ago, the hostility in her eyes cracked into something rawer. Exhaustion, fear, and underneath it, a fragile, furious hope that maybe she wasn't facing this alone after all. 4 years, she said softly. 4 years I told myself I built this life on careful. Turns out I built it on a lie I didn't even know I was telling myself. You didn't lie to anyone, Junho said. You trusted the people who were supposed to earn it. That's not the same thing as being careless. Spoken like a man who vanished instead of trusting anyone at all. It landed exactly as hard as she meant it to, and he didn't argue, because there was no argument that survived contact with the truth. Outside, the sky over Seoul had started its slow bruise toward gray. Sunrise, the deadline Sujin had whispered hours ago, now less than 40 minutes away. But the threat waiting for them wasn't an ambulance on a quiet road anymore. It was closer than that. It had always been closer than that. Junho's phone buzzed once in his pocket. A message from one of his men stationed at the hospital's main entrance. A woman matching Abana Mensah's description just arrived. She's asking for room 412 by name. Amma saw his face change and didn't need to ask what the message said. She's here, he said. Your sister is downstairs, and she knows exactly which room to ask for. Abina Mensah stood in the hospital lobby looking like a woman who hadn't slept in days, her coat rumpled, her hands choking around a paper cup of coffee she clearly wasn't drinking, just holding for something to hold. Junho had 2 choices walking down to meet her: confront her like an enemy, or give her the one thing betrayers rarely got offered, the chance to explain herself before judgment landed. He chose the second, not out of mercy, but because Amma needed the truth more than she needed revenge, and the truth came easier from a frightened woman than a cornered one. "You knew," he said, no greeting, no preamble. "About the hospital, the timeline, you told them." Abina's coffee cup trembled. "I didn't know what they'd do with it. I swear to you, I didn't know they'd come here tonight." "You sold your sister's location to the most dangerous family in this city, and you didn't think to ask what they wanted it for?" "I thought it was just information." Her voice cracked, raw with a guilt she'd clearly been carrying alone for months. "They said they just wanted to know Amma was safe, that they were old family friends checking in. I needed the money for the business, and I told myself it was harmless, and every single day since I've hated myself a little more for believing that lie, because some part of me always knew it wasn't true." Junho studied her, not as an enemy now, but as what she actually was, a frightened, ashamed woman who'd made one catastrophic mistake out of desperation, not malice. He'd spent his whole life surrounded by people who chose cruelty. This wasn't that. This was something smaller and sadder. "Does Amma know everything?" he asked. "All of it, not the version that makes you sound less guilty." Abina's eyes filled. "I'll tell her myself, all of it." Upstairs, the reunion between the sisters was not gentle. There were tears, there was anger sharp enough to cut. There was a long silence where Amma simply held her sleeping son and stared at the wall while Abina sobbed apologies into hands that shook. But underneath the wreckage of broken trust, something else was happening too. The slow, grudging work of two sisters choosing, painfully, to start rebuilding instead of walking away. Family, Junho had learned tonight in the hardest way possible, wasn't about never breaking. It was about what you did with the pieces afterward. As for the Yoon family, Haerin's retreat down that stairwell hadn't been a surrender, but it had been a miscalculation she wouldn't get to repeat. By the time the sun actually broke over Seoul, full and orange and indifferent to the night it was erasing, Junho had already set 3 of his most trusted men to dismantling every thread the Yoons had used to find Amma in the first place. Bribed staff quietly relocated and replaced, financial trails cut, and a message sent up the chain that the Quiet Storm's family was no longer unguarded, unclaimed, or available to anyone's bargaining table. Lieutenant Park kept his kneecaps and his sister's medical coverage, and earned, slowly, the kind of second chance that came with conditions instead of trust, which, Junho figured, was more grace than the man had any right to expect, and exactly as much as he deserved. By mid-morning, the hospital room felt different. Quieter, not from fear this time, but from the particular peace that settles after a storm finally runs out of places left to strike. Amma sat up in bed, her son asleep against her chest, and watched Junho standing by the window like a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about strength. "You could have just walked away again," she said. "Once the danger passed, gone back to your world, left us in mine." "I tried that once," he said, turning to face her. "I was wrong about what it would protect. I'm not interested in being wrong about the same thing twice. That's not an apology." "No," he agreed, crossing the room, kneeling beside the bed so he was eye level with the boy whose fist had refused to let go of him 8 hours and 1 lifetime ago. "It's a promise. Apologies are for the past. I'd rather earn this one going forward." Amma didn't answer right away. But she didn't pull her hand back when his found hers either. And outside the window, Seoul kept changing which lies it told at night, except in this one room. For the first time in 4 years, nobody was telling any at all.